at YouTube, there's always this thing which is most users of YouTube are too young to work at YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like the question is like, how do you develop empathy for them?
Welcome to another exciting episode of Product Unfiltered. Today we have a very special guest joining in, Satyajeet Salgar, the Director of Product Management at YouTube. Satyajeet is a seasoned product leader with a wealth of experience and expertise. Currently, he spearheads YouTube Shopping, focusing on live shopping, search, and discovery, and empowering merchants and creators. Throughout his career, Satyajit has made some remarkable contributions to the Google's product landscape. He led the product team behind Google Discover feed experiences and played a pivotal role in enhancing media experiences for TV, movies, books, games, and events during his 8-year tenure in Google Search. But that's not all. Satyajit has also driven product initiatives for Google Assistant and Search, YouTube Live and Games, and made significant contributions to payments and ads. We are truly grateful to have Satyajit join us on Product Unfiltered. Thank you so much, Satyajit. It's great to have you on our show. And we are really looking forward to a very constructive conversation and gaining from your insights about product management.
So thank you for the invitation, guys. Look forward to chatting with you.
Thank you. And Satyajit, like before we actually dive deep into the product management experiences and principles, we would love to know more about your journey at Google. And we know that your journey till now has been so diverse, from being a product manager at YouTube to leading initiatives across search, assistant, ads, payments. So could you share some key moments or experiences from this journey, and how have they shaped your approach to product management so far?
Yeah, maybe I'll start at the beginning. So even before I joined Google, my first job out of school was I went to go work at a startup that a professor that I knew co-founded. And I remember I had this idea in my head that I should go to business school. So after about 3 years, I was leaving to go to business school. And I remember the first product manager for that startup joined like a few weeks before I was leaving. And I had a conversation with her, like, oh, this is an interesting job. This sounds like something we may end up like that could be interesting to me. So after a summer in consulting, I realized, I wanted to go back to tech. And so I started at Google actually in a partnerships role. And then once I was here, I realized that given my interests and the things that I was good at, product management was a really attractive option for me. So that was about 14 years ago. And since then I've sort of done a bunch of different roles within Google. So I started out at YouTube. I worked on Google TV ads, which is a product we had that like ran an auction and then inserted an ad on a TV network. Then I worked on payments out of our New York office. I did merchant side work, and then I eventually became the buyer side PM. Then I moved and became the first PM on, or sort of took on Google Plus Games, which was essentially a gaming platform we had on Google Plus. Yeah. That morphed into, we sort of started building the mobile version of that, which became, if you're familiar with Google Play Games, it became that a little bit later. Then some of the folks I used to work with at YouTube asked me to come back. Come back to YouTube, and I was the first live streaming PM at YouTube. So sort of built the YouTube Live as a service. And then a couple of years after that, I sort of came to search, which is, and since then on search, I did, to your point, like I spent about 8 years. I did a bunch of different things. For a while, I was the answers PM. So any sort of, if you saw a knowledge panel to the right, or you saw a white box on top, I worked on that. I was the media PM all through. So any searches related to TV, movies, music, books, games, stuff like that. For a while, I did search UI and page structure. And then I started what we call the delight team, which was sort of Easter eggs and things like doodles were also included in that. And then I worked on Discover for a bit, and then for the last year and a half, I've been on the YouTube shopping team, trying to figure out how to make YouTube a place where you can buy things from YouTube creators that you trust. So that was the accelerated version of that.
The journey itself is so inspiring. We're building so many products across the Google portfolio. But Satyajit, also, if you can take us through some of the challenges in the initial phase which you faced in your career, and with time, how has those challenges evolved in your career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I'll say is it's fairly the challenges you're having are about many different things, right? Which is the first is I think you're trying to grow as a PM, which is you're trying to grow your own skills and sort of you come in at a certain so what ends up happening is early on in your career you get either a small feature on a product or you get a small product and you have certain responsibilities there. So you're trying to make that product successful, but also at the same time like you're learning the job and learning how to be credible to your team. So one of my former sort of bosses had this theory that he always said, which is product manager growth is rarely linear, right? Like it's not like you get a little bit better each day, a little bit better each day. He's like, especially on certain cases, it's almost like an S curve, right? Like which is you get a little bit better, then suddenly you get dramatically better, right? And the reason that happens is at some point you get, okay, this is what this team is doing. This is what they need. This is how I can be successful here. And so a large part of it initially is you're trying to get better, and you're trying to understand how you operate, right? You sort of need to understand what are you good at, what do you need to rely on other people for help for. So I think I'd say like as you look at your journeys in your career, which is you need to pick teams that you're excited about for whatever reason, right? Like whether you like the domain, whether it's something that the user base speaks to you intellectually, it's interesting. And then you need to pick ideally teams where you can learn from people around you. And so I was very lucky that the first few teams that I picked, I got to learn how to be a better PM from each of them, right? So in some cases I learned how to think about ecosystems. In other cases, my first PM job, I ended up working with an incredible designer who taught me how a product manager should work with design. Because my first job was in partnerships, I came in with a sense of I need to understand how, as a product manager, I can work with the ecosystem and make that work. So I think these are things, I think early on in your career, you're sort of learning how to do the job, how to think about product, how to come up with ideas, how to influence people. At a certain stage, the scope of that just keeps growing, right? And then you're now thinking about the product complexity increases, the impact increases. And then if you choose the management path, right, then you're thinking, okay, how do I coach a team to do that? How do I organize a team to do that? And as that team grows, how do you organize like their reports and their managers to do that? And I think so the product complexity, keeps on increasing. But the other thing that you keep thinking about is organizationally, like how do I set things up? What do I teach people? How do I divide up certain things? How do I inspire people? All of that stuff also gets into the picture.
Yeah. And like Satyajit, something which you mentioned here was picking the right teams at your different stages of career and learning from them. So can you share some tips with our listeners that, when we are interviewing with any company or any team, what are some things which we should look in those teams before making a decision to join that team or not?
No, that's a great question. So I advise a lot of people on this. I think it starts with an understanding of what you're good at and what you want out of the job, right? Which is, so let me actually go through some basics and then talk about specifics, right? So I think first of all, you should just look for, you should have a clear understanding of what you're getting into. So you should understand the manager, you should understand team culture, right? Which is, so I often tell what people that interview with me, I kind of say, pick 2 reports on my team, just talk to them frankly about what is it like to work for me.
Hmm.
Because I think it's really important to have that sense of, is this person a fit, right? Even if two people are really good, sometimes the fit may not be there,
Yeah.
right? You should, by the way, that applies to the entire team culture. Right? Whoever your engineering partner is, who your design partner is, make sure it's a place where you will feel comfortable and you will feel like you're able to do good work. So that's one. The second is also make sure, especially if you're in early stages of your career, it's a place where you will learn, right? So think about, let's say you do that job for 1 or 2 years. What do you think will be true at the end of it, right? Which is, what have you learned? What have you delivered? What can you say you've gotten better at? I think that part is really, really important. I think, and that part requires an understanding of where you are and what you want to be. So I don't advise this, but a friend of mine used to always say this thing: don't think about the job. Think about the job you want like 5 years from now, and think about, okay, is this job on a path to get you there, right? Or is it a sort of diversion? So the thing I would say is it's really important. Like, so different people index on different reasons why they get jobs, right? So for me, the product matters a lot. Is it something I can get excited about? Is it something I like thinking about? I think you're always lucky if you can sort of wake up and you think about something anyway, and now you get to think about it for work.
Yeah.
There are others whom that matters less, right? Like, and I think that's also okay, right? Which is, I think they rightfully say, like, yeah, people can get excited about anything. It's much more important what else is going on, right? So you can be excited about the product, but if the team is bad or the culture is bad, you're not going to be happy. So I think they're much more selective about, is it a good environment? Are the people around me good? Do I enjoy working with them? So to me, like, when you interview at places, those are the things to think about, which is, does this culture speak to me? Do the values of this place speak to me? Is it a place where I'll learn and I'll get better? And then finally, like, is this something that I'm excited about, right? Like, do I think I can get up in the morning and be excited to think about this all day? So I'd say, yeah, those are the things to keep in mind when you evaluate a new role.
Yeah. And I think culture in itself is a very big term, Satyajit. So
Yeah.
again, it depends what's the work culture like for the company and what's the product culture like for your product team. And there
Mhm.
needs to be some differentiation amongst those two. So what is your take on it? Let us know from both the perspectives. So we want to hear it from Satyajit, who joined Google some years back, and when he joined into product space, what was his take on the culture scenario? And now as a product leader where you are building teams, you are recruiting people, how do
Yeah.
you build a culture around your org or around your team?
It's a really good question. I think it's hard for me. Like, when people ask me this, I kind of say, like, hey, Google culture has changed a lot over the years, right? And simply because it's a much bigger company when I joined, right? When I joined, I think, I'm trying to remember the number of people. I think there were 20,000 people, and um, I was my job before then. I worked at a startup that had like 50 people, and then when I left this other company, it had like maybe 100 people. When I joined, it had like maybe 20 people. So I was like, oh man, this is just way too many people. I don't know what's going to happen here. And you think about what has happened in the 15 years since, right? So I think, and as a result, what has happened is, there is definitely a Google culture, but there are also subcultures, right? Which is, YouTube is very different from search, is very different from Android, and even within that, right, the team that you join could be very different. And so I think going in, you sort of need to know that, right? Like, how do they make decisions? Who's the leader of the team? What do they believe? And I think it's very important for anyone to identify with that, right? Because at the end of the day, right, like, the people, like, that matters, right? I think if you're struggling to sort of match your values with the values of the leadership of whatever you're joining, I think it becomes a lot harder. So in my case, I've been fairly lucky in that I think Google has been very deliberate and actually pretty good about generally hiring really great people across the board, including in leadership. So I think that part has been really good. So, but it's still important for you to find the teams and leaders with whom your values and your thinking match, right? So that's one. I'd say then it becomes, right, like, and to your point about product culture, what is the product culture you believe you want to have, and how do you want to push it? And so my take is, I think I believe in, I believe that, like, the most important thing a product manager does is make good decisions that actually empower your team and that lead to, like, really good business value, right? So the culture you need to have is one where there are lots of good ideas, but the most important thing you do is you make good decisions about those ideas and what to do next and how you execute. And there are different ways to get there. I believe the best way to get there is a lot of transparency, a lot of thought, a lot of depth, but I think also a lot of debate, right? So the thing I believe is, like, you should. Some people work well, so there's some PMs on my team. They'll just sit down for a couple of hours, write a document, and that will be like, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, you've thought all of this through. There are other PMs on my team that want to discuss things for 3 or 4 hours, and that's how they get through things. So everyone's style is different, but what you want to get to is, are we making the best product decisions? Have we thought them through completely? And then once you have those, are you bringing everyone along? It's not enough to sort of have a great decision. You need to bring your engineering team along. You need to convince leadership, right? Like, is all of that happening? Is that happening well? I think that needs to be, like, that's the culture I aspire to create, right? Which is this the best decision, and does everyone understand why it is the best decision? Yeah.
And Satyajit, talking about product culture, one thing which I always admire about Google is its company culture. So we were talking about product culture, but yes, company culture is something which I think all the world appreciates Google about. So if I can just ask you in 3 words, if in 3 words, 3 different words, you can summarize what are some best things about Google's company culture. 3 words or 3 lines. So it will really help our listeners.
I think. So, when people, so let me think about that a little bit. So let me put it this way, which is, I think you always hear when people leave Google and come back or whatever, the thing they always talk about is they miss the people. And I think the reason they say that is there's a level of just a little bit of what I mentioned. There's a level of intellectual honesty, there's a level of kindness, and there's a level of ambition. So I'd say, like, those, you ask for 3 things. I would say those 3 things are the ones, right? Which is, people are ambitious, so they want to do important, big things, right? Like, they want to make technical breakthroughs, they want to make product breakthroughs, so that ambition is there. People are honest intellectually, so it's very, like, you're dealing with truth, and you're dealing with facts, and you're trying to find the real thing that will that will make an impact. But also, people are kind, right? Which is, I think it's very, life is too short to, like, deal with people that are hard to work with, or are not, like, inspiring, or not good in the way of, like, relating with people. So I think to me, those 3 things are the ones that sort of how I would, to me, are the best parts of Google culture, I guess is the way I put it.
Yeah, and that's very true. Like, keeping people at the center of the company, that in itself speaks for the culture of the company. So that's very true. But Satyajit, also speak to us about YouTube. So we have seen YouTube evolving drastically over the years. And since you have played a significant role in YouTube Live, which is like one of the best features according to me, which has empowered so many people all across the globe. Now they can do anything and everything with their computer right away, and they can create content, they can entertain people out there. So talk to us about YouTube Live. What were the challenges? What was the thought process while you were building that?
I mean, I should, to sort of set context, I was the first PM on YouTube Live, and it's almost, I'm trying to get the date back in. It was like 11 years ago at this point, right? So it was a long time ago. 10 or 11 years ago. But yeah, I can tell you the way it was an interesting. It's an interesting product experience as well, right? Because when I joined, once I accepted the role, the person in charge of the product and engineering team then actually told me like, by the way, you should know we think there's a 50% chance you come back at the end of the year and tell us you should shut this down. But that is it was very empowering because he said like that's the level of trust we have in you as a PM, which is you're going to make that call. So I think it's a few things, right? Which is, and it's a great example in my mind of like a hard product problem because it had multiple aspects, right? There was a consumer aspect. Why will people watch it? Uh, and then there's a creator aspect of who's live streaming. But then there's just a business aspect of live streaming is, especially the way YouTube had built it then, was extremely expensive. And so what is the business model tied to this? Because the way YouTube sold ads was actually going at the time against live ads. So there was like, there was this thing called TrueView where you can skip the ad. That doesn't work for live streaming, right?
Yeah.
And so it was a very complex problem. And I think the thing that I needed to do early on is sort of manage all of those things, right? Which is we needed to almost rewrite all the infrastructure. So the engineering team needed time to do that, to make it both more cost efficient, but also make it like lower latency because the latency was pretty high. But then in the meanwhile, you can't go in a shell for a year because then like you just lose momentum as an org, you lose momentum as a team. So you needed to find the creators who could live with the limitations of that platform while starting to open up the platform. And so again, I needed, it was very classic PM 101. You need to segment all your users, figure out whom your product worked for, figure out, okay, is there a way to monetize this? And so that was the challenge back then, which is, can you get the infrastructure working? Can you get all of this working? And then, by the way, can people find it, right? Like, yes, someone's live streaming, but if no one can find that the live stream's there, what's the point? So there's search and discovery to work into it. So, like, I would say the first year was figuring out all of those things. And I really sort of early on focused much more on the creator side of the experience. Then as things started ramping up, I had to think about discovery and things of that sort a lot more. But it's been amazing to see, right? It's been amazing to see what then was, and then, it turned out like, a sweet spot was gaming. And then years later now that I've come back, I see, I have a team that works on live shopping, and they're basically building on that platform and helping people shop in places. So it's an amazing transition to kind of see just how something starts back then, and then you sort of look at it evolve like many years later, and how it's sort of taken shape.
Yeah,
that is so inspiring, Satyajit. In fact, while you were sharing all that journey developing YouTube Live, and now that you have again come to the YouTube platform, something which really struck me was that you have been with YouTube since its inception in 2007. So, and you have worked on a platform on multiple stages, right? From a time when it was very new, there were not many users. Yes, it was a popular platform, but from then to now it's a very mature product. And like we, as students of product management, we know that, getting any features built for a mature product takes a lot more vigor and takes a lot more creativity rather than building features for a very new product. So would love to learn your perspective. How has been developing products at Google or at YouTube been through all these stages, from a stage at a very early stage to a very mature product stage?
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate to work on a mix of things and have people on my team work on a mix of things, right? Which is, early on, almost everything I worked on was, if you think about products as 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and then 10 to scale, right? Let's say. I think early on I worked on a lot of like 0 to 1 and 1 to 10 things, right? Which is, hey, we're building this for the very first time, and then hey, there's something here, and you're trying to scale it to like some amount of like reasonable number of people. And then at some point, I moved to search, and search is already like you're scared to a billion people, and you're trying to add more, right? Um, so I think the way you think about features and how you think about risk changes a lot, right? So to your point, like I actually, you're right. Like I missed it, but because I've worked at YouTube technically 3 times now, and I've seen slices right from 2007 to like all the way now. I think as the size of I sort of joke to people, which is when I came back to YouTube this time, uh, we have a launch process that's fairly rigorous, and a lot of people discuss things, and you go through this. And I was telling them, the last time I was here, like nobody used a launch calendar, or like we used it very loosely. Uh, and I think that's just that's how companies evolve. And once you get scale, there's a lot more discipline, there's a lot more scrutiny. Uh, and you just have to be a lot more rigorous but just simply because of the impact you have, right? Which is mistakes are seen by millions and billions of people.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the big difference. I don't think you'd be. I think most people are surprised when I joined Search. Everything I'd done before then was like people saw as fairly entrepreneurial, and so they were like, oh, Search isn't it like a big established product? Aren't you like, what are you going to build like this new, right? Like, isn't it more of an engineering problem than a product problem? But I thought like the hardest product problems that I worked on and the most sort of room to innovate we had was when I first, like the early days of when I search, which we were trying a bunch of different things. We said, oh, here are a whole bunch of new features for when someone searches for TV shows and movies. Here's a whole bunch of new features when someone goes for books. And so we were trying fairly new things. It was just on a large base. So we had to make sure even if we gave something new, we didn't make the existing experience worse. That was really important. And so I think that's the big constraint with products that are already successful and scaled, which is you have to keep making them better so that they're keeping up with the market, or people love them more, or you're adding new businesses. But you also need to understand your impact on the old business, on the scared users. And it doesn't necessarily be you have to preserve it, but if you're sort of bringing it down, like you have to understand that and then plan for it and all of that stuff. So I think that's the big difference between you have the luxury at 0 to 1 of not worrying about existing users. The flip side is you don't have existing users to like scale. But I think that's the trade-off. I think both are really interesting in different ways.
Yeah, I have a very quick follow-up here, Satyajeet. Like, as early stage PMs, something which me, Rahul, and all our friends really talk about is what is the right path to go ahead in your early stage of career? Should we work on 0 to 1 products at early stage startups, or maybe in big companies like Google, but the products are relatively new? Or is it better to work on these mature 1 to scale products at well-established companies where you get to own a very small part of a big feature? But yes, you get to experience all these kind of rigorous scale and discipline in these companies. So what is your take on it?
So I'll give you a third path, which is a middle, which is you join something like sort of a mid-scale startup, right? So the product market fit has been proved, but they have to scale a lot and they have to add a whole bunch of new features. So I'd say like there's a middle path to what you said also. But I'd say the right answer for you is it depends. There is no wrong answer. It depends on what you're looking for, right? So my first job out of school, I had to choose. I had a similar choice, which is there's a really large company in enterprise software. And again, so I was an engineer at the time, so I would have learned. So what I had the choice between going there and going to the startup. And basically what the person that advised me is like, look, ultimately it's going to be this gut call for you. But here's what I think you'll learn in these places. Here you'll really learn about established processes, how to ship, all of that stuff. You'll learn a certain discipline if you go to this large company. Here, you're not going to have as much, like there'll be less teaching, right? Because we're just trying to build something. There'll be more chaos, but you get to do a lot of things. And for whatever reason, that second thing spoke more to me at the time, right? And also like I like the people and all of that stuff. But I think that's the thing, right? Like it'll depend on each person and what you're trying to get out of it. Like I said, think about what is the job you want, 5 years out from the job you're about to take. If
Yeah.
the job you want is, oh, I want to start my own company 5 years from now, right? I think then the path
Mhm.
becomes really clear for you,
Yeah.
right? Which is go to that early stage thing, see what it's like, see what's happening, right? On the other hand, if the thing that you want is um, you want to run a large product org at some point, then you should get a sense of what, like I'd say the other two things that I described, the mid stage and the large stage, might be the
Mhm.
ones for you. But I think the specifics matter a lot. Like I think, um, yeah, I'm asked some version of this question, and I actually I was like, the specifics matter quite a bit, right? Like, what is the large company? What is their culture like? Right?
Yeah.
Like even if you ask me that question about Google, I would have to ask you, oh, which team, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think the specifics matter more, but I think the way to sort of make that decision is to sort of filter it down even further, which is like, what is the team, and then what do I want out of this? Will I get what
Mhm.
I want out of this if I do this job? Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Satyajit, for people like us who are very early in their career and entering into the product space, working for products which would be used by millions and millions of people out there, it can be very overwhelming when you're building those products. So, what would you suggest for aspiring product managers or early product managers when they are working on a product which will impact a huge user base while the product is built?
Just enjoy it, right? Like honestly, there's the flip side of that is if you're working on, hopefully if you're working on a product that's impacting many users, you're working on it with other people. So there's
Yeah.
context, there's history, there's other PMs, there's engineering leaders, UX leaders. So I think the good part generally is there's a lot to learn, right? So make sure you're optimizing for learning. And I've been lucky enough to work with many people whose first job was on search. And
Mhm.
I think it's and all of them are generally fresh out of school, either fresh out of business school or fresh out of undergrad
Mhm.
or masters. And I think they are. I am generally blown away by sort of the originality they bring and just sort of the impact that they have almost right away,
Mhm.
consistently. So I've been lucky enough to work with many people that way, and I find once you're on it, you learn the processes, but very few people are actually intimidated by it. They actually really enjoy it. They
Mhm.
typically, because it's something generally, if a lot of people use it, maybe you're one of the users as well. So you have strong opinions.
Yeah.
And so you bring a lot of intuition to these things as well. So that's been really good.
Mhm. Also, share a bit about diversity, having diversity in a team, because we have seen traditionally that a lot of engineers these days are transitioning towards product. So, as a product leader, how do you make sure that there is equal diversity in the team, so that people from different backgrounds come to product space and they share their thought processes, their way of building products? What is your thoughts
Yeah.
about it?
No, I think it's critical. It's critical to have people so I find great product managers. So I'll talk about like product management background diversity and then just diversity in a team in general,
Mhm.
right? So I find that tech definitely has a bias for like engineers getting into, especially historically, right?
Yeah.
Technical backgrounds are very valued for product managers.
Mm.
I think the thing I found over time is the best PMs have all sorts of backgrounds, right? Like one of the best PMs that I work with was used to be a designer.
Mhm.
Others come with like liberal arts backgrounds, and I think it's a increasingly what I think is going to happen is um, you'll have an even greater diversity of backgrounds for coming into PMs, right? Which is
Mhm.
um, just because like I think subject matter expertise will matter a lot more than sort of do you relate well with engineers. I
Mhm.
think because everyone will have a certain amount of tech literacy and being able to communicate with engineers. So I think your interest in the domain and your product instincts, which don't require you to have a technical background, will matter a lot more. It does mean that I think you have to be thoughtful about hiring and where you're pulling people from their backgrounds. But to your point, um, you need to have people that really care about a domain, and it's really hard if they don't understand that domain really well, right? So I would say the most important job a product manager has is to have this deep user empathy, right? You have to understand whoever your user is better than anyone else. And I think at YouTube, there's always this thing which is most users of YouTube are too young to work at YouTube. Right? So the question is how do you develop empathy for them? And so I think to answer your diversity question, it's this, the diversity in backgrounds. I think you sort of screen, you make sure you cast a wide enough pool, but it goes to backgrounds as well, right? Um, you know, uh, where are your users, right? Where are they coming from? What are their perspectives? And it's always helpful to have someone on the team with that background. But it's also, even if you don't, it's important for the team to understand where they're how to get into the minds of whoever their customers are.
So Satyajit, now shifting gears, let's talk about technology a bit. So in the recent times, we have seen generative AI disrupting the whole technology space. So let's just hear your thoughts about generative AI, and then we can deep dive into the topic.
Yeah, I'm not an expert, but I feel like we're on the precipice of sort of the biggest technical change that I think that certainly I think it. I mean, if you think about, you guys might be too young, but imagine I can imagine a world where there wasn't the internet, and there was, and then I can think about a world where when I was sort of in grad school and stuff like that, the thing that mattered was sort of we talked about networking and distributed systems as the next great thing, and we thought that and databases is going to be sort of our career. But then you sort of fast forward a couple of years later and you think about smartphones and cloud and all of that, right? So AI kind of builds on all of those capabilities, right? The fact that the internet exists, the fact that large data exist, the fact that cloud computing exists, but it's such a massive shift that I think and again, I think all of us know it'll affect. I think the expectation is, especially with the breakthroughs in the last couple of years, that it will affect almost everything that we do. And the question is, how do you adapt to that and how do you use it? I think I'm actually forgetting whom the quote is attributed to now, but there's this thing I read, which is, people are worried about AI taking jobs, etc. It's more likely someone that knows how to use AI will take your job rather than sort of AI taking your job. And I think that's the thing I'd say in general. It's to my mind, it's one of the most massive shifts that I've seen in a while, right? The thing I often tell people is, if you're in the US, you can opt into to what's called. I mean, if you use ChatGPT, you already understand how it can affect just how quickly you work and how you work. But even or Bard, but also if you just turn on what we call the search generative experience on Google, it changes just how quickly you can get many things done, and the quality of the decisions you get to. I recently wrote this post actually, and maybe this is another example of I have a process for thinking about product ideas and stuff where I sit down. I generally try and keep my computer away and sort of jot thoughts, and when I have to research something, I sort of turn and get to the computer and then come back. For whatever reason, a few weeks ago, I tried this thing where I just fired up ChatGPT and Bard and asked it questions, saw what it spit out, and said, no, let me think about this differently, and then spit stuff again, came out. And then I was scribbling on a paper over here, but mainly working with ChatGPT and Bard. And I found that I made more progress on the idea that I was thinking about in that night than I normally would. And so if you think about just that, right, like it's changed idea generation, it's changed how people write emails, it'll change how people make videos and images. And I mean, already it has, massive impacts on, if you think about, AI more broadly and think about like self-driving and recommendations and all of that stuff. I mean, it's the most significant change, I think, technically that we're going to experience in certainly my lifetime. So I think we should all be extremely excited about it, and curious about how to apply it in our lives.
And Satyajit, what is the future of product management with the onset of generative AI? You mentioned that you got that personal assistant buddy who was there to brainstorm so many product principles and product ideas. But what do you think is the future of PM after this onset of AI?
Yeah, so I think there are maybe three things, right? One is, I think, I gave you the example of how I came up with an idea, but like I think one is thinking about how generative AI and AI in general change the tools of PMing, right? Which is, I talked about this as a way to like generate ideas, but think about other things PMs do: make mocks, have like sort of. I always tell my PMs, get reasonably good at some light sketching thing, right? Whether it's balsamic or something else, or like now I think people are pretty comfortable just working in Figma. I think about how that changes now, right? Like that becomes dramatically easier. Think about things like analysis, right? Like people spend so much time, like a key superpower of PMs is to make sense of data, make sense of logs, and sort of extract insights from that. The tools now to do that are going to like get supercharged in such an incredible way. So I think that's one, right? Which is just the tools that you use to do your job change dramatically. The second is the product you're working on probably needs to change dramatically to accommodate AI, right? Like AI will either supercharge the product or render it irrelevant, right? So thinking about, is AI an accelerant for your product and your category, or is it a disruptor, right? Like how can you use AI to make every aspect of your product better? By the way, like, do advances in AI mean that your product is now irrelevant and you should be doing something else, right? So there's even just thinking about that, like what is a direct impact, direct competitor, direct substitute? Is it a complement? All of that stuff. I think every PM should be thinking hard about that. And then there's a third, which is the world is going to change with AI, right? Which is, so what sort of new opportunities does that create for you? What new product lines are going to matter? Like, will people will people's expectations change, right? Like, of what they see in the world, and then like, what does that unlock? So I think there are these three things, right? Like sort of your own personal work, the category and product you work on, and then frankly, just you should think about how people evolve things, and how sort of consumer behavior evolves, and how the world evolves, because that'll be a whole bunch of new opportunities that come out of it. So I think there are all three aspects that affect the PM.
That's very true, because PM space is something which will be disrupted. Not just PM space, ideally every space would be disrupted, but it's very important to take it up to the chest and be ahead with the curve so that you are the one who leads it tomorrow.
That's right. I think like there's a PM I know who spends a lot of time on this, and the way he put it is, like, this is going to be the most significant thing that happens. Is like, I'm trying to find ways to spend more time on it. And I think that's all of us should be thinking about, like either learning more or I mean, I think this would be much worse than computers were coming and people were like, oh no, I'm not going to learn the computer, right? Like, so it's I would say like an even sort of, it's a worse version of that.
That's true. So Satyajit, let's move on to the next segment of our podcast. This is the rapid fire round. We would basically be sharing a question and would love to hear your thoughts on that. And as the name suggests, we would want it to be rapid from your side.
All right, I'll try my best.
So the first rapid fire question for you is, can you define product management in 3 words?
Uh, Decision making, inspiration, clarity.
Okay. Your favorite book on product management?
The first few chapters of Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, because it reminds me that most strategy that I read is bad strategy.
Okay. Best advice you have received as a product manager?
Um, Grit, right? Like sort of. I think the best thing as a product, the thing you need to do as a product manager is uh, yourself be very good at saying no, but saying it very politely, but also
Mhm.
figuring out how to turn other people's no's into yeses.
Yeah.
And so I've heard actually the best, I used to, people used to describe that quality to me as grit, but I've heard people now use, actually Shreyas Doshi uses the term agency a lot. That was the first time I heard someone use that.
Hmm.
And I think that's a better description of like people just have a lot of like autonomy and agency and are able to get things done.
Okay. Best advice you have given to someone as a product manager?
Um, think more deeply about what decisions are reversible and what not.
Hmm.
Uh, because I think this particular person was extremely thoughtful, but was almost sort of getting caught up in analysis paralysis.
Hmm.
And so I think what helped them, and it sort of unlocked their career in a number of ways, was okay, this is a decision that is reversible and I can make it quickly. This the other decision is requires a lot of thought and I should follow my process.
Yeah.
So I think
Okay.
that's one piece of
Hmm.
advice.
Favorite feature you have worked on Google for Google?
Ooh, it's like picking with your amongst your children. You can't do it. Um, I would say watch actions on search simply because it was the first thing I worked on when I came to search.
Okay. One word that describes the future of YouTube.
Bright.
Okay. Very safe.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. Last fire, rapid fire question for you. One skill every PM should have.
A desire to learn, and
Hmm.
and you just a natural curiosity and a desire to learn.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much, Satyajit, for being such a sport and taking
No,
that
no.
rapid fire round. Since we are heading towards the last segment of the podcast, we would love to understand from you in such a dynamic market where people are entering into the market right now. What would be
Mhm.
your advice for them? How do they navigate their career path in the product space?
Um, I think there's two aspects to what you said. Like one, do you just how do you get better as a PM? How do you have the skills? And the second is how do
Hmm.
you get the job, right?
Exactly.
Which is I think so. The first one, I think if you're in a PM job, again, think about how you're getting better. What are you learning? Are you surrounding yourself with the right people? A lot of PMing is, sort of when in the past when they've run these studies at Google, they found that the best PMs are generally former entrepreneurs, um,
Hmm.
because they have this sense of like, okay, I can get things done. I know how to take no. I sort of have high agency naturally, etc. So I
Hmm.
think learning that skill set, learning that behavior is really important. Um, Irrespective of what your current job is, irrespective of what company you're in, etc. I think the second part is how do you get the job, right? Which
Yeah.
is, and there you have to demonstrate the skills. You have to interview well. You have to convince people. And I think the reality of this, I think the PM job is a very desirable job, so a lot of people want it. But also right
Hmm.
now the environment is sort of is a hard environment to get any job in, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, so I think finding an in is important, right? So generally, I either you have something in your background where you know a domain well and you can translate that to a PM role in that domain, or you're able to demonstrate some set of things where a company can look at that body of work, is whether it's a side project or like a doc you've written or some ideas where they say like, oh, this person looks really interesting, we should engage more with them in this context.
Hmm.
And so to me, like that's the hard part right now, figuring out sort of how do you demonstrate that interest when there's so much how do you demonstrate that level of depth when there's so much interest in
Mm-hmm.
sort of the role? And I think that to me is the hard part, right? Which is, but again, these things are cyclical. It'll take a while, but it'll get back
Yeah.
up to sort of what it was. But yeah, I think that to me is the thing to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Satyajit, for sharing all these great insights. So, as we move towards the end of our podcast, our last question for you is: what are some resources which you follow to keep yourself updated in the world of evolving product management? So, any resources, blogs, articles which you follow? Which
Yeah, I need to come up with a better answer for this. So I'm going to say the thing that I think most people on your podcast will say, which is subscribe to Lenny's newsletter, follow Shreyas Doshi on Twitter. I think Shreyas is actually probably the person that I read the most often and go, yeah, oh yeah, like this person like has nailed the thing that has articulated something that like I couldn't articulate in my head, right? It was like a
Mm-hmm.
loose idea. And I think he sort of brings up a lot of interesting things. I think in general, the thing I would say on this is it's really important to keep learning, right? So I think budgeting some time in the day to like figure out what you want to learn, and it could be something related to like you could learn it literally while working, right? We say like, hey, this thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to I'm not going to ask the designer to like make the mocks. I'm going to make the mocks on this. That's a way for me to learn some skills. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so having the sense of what is the thing I'm getting better at? Is it storytelling? Is it some hard skill? Is it some soft skill? You should always keep doing that at work, but even reserving time to like actually find out and read some stuff, right? So I actually get a lot out of product Twitter. I sort of have stumbled into it, but I actually I'm not even sure how many people I follow that sort of treat PM stuff on Twitter, but I do a lot, and I always go like, oh, that's super interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and then that leads to an article. The thing with the PM function is it's also very there are aspects of almost every job, right? Like if you're reading about strategy, if you're reading about marketing, if you're reading about market dynamics, if you're reading about pricing, you're really reading about product management also, right?
Yeah.
So I think the more diverse you read, things you read, um, the more curious you are, the more sort of thoughtful you are about these things, the better. So I would say like, budgeting a lot of time to be curious and read stuff is really important,
Mm-hmm.
and work on some skill. Um,
Yeah.
and what that can vary. Like I like to read a lot of books. I like to read a lot of businessy books,
Mm-hmm.
and those help. I like to read a lot of these articles and sort of general
Yeah.
topics. That helps. For example, I read this book on just visual design, which I think again just helped me.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all sorts of things that I recommend. Like read broadly. It'll help your PM skills.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Satyajit, for sharing all those amazing insights.
Not
It's
at all.
always so refreshing to hear from people like you and Product Unfiltered. For me and Utkarsh personally, it has given us a great platform to have discussions around things which we want people to know about, or aspiring product managers can get a lot of insights from this. So, this officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Hope you all enjoyed the episode and our discussion has helped learn something new. Stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Thank you so much for tuning into Product Unfiltered.
Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun.